And welcome to this CGTN live broadcast. My name's Martin Lowe. I'm in southern Thailand on a beach just north of the island of Phuket, and it's a lovely day. It's a beautiful beach. If you look around, the sun's shining, the sand is enticing, the sea is blue. There's even a local soccer tournament going on just over there to the side of us, organised for local people. For many people, Thailand is their idea of paradise, and you can perhaps see why. But it was on a day very much like this back on December the 26th, 2004, when in an instant everything changed. That was the day of the Indian Ocean tsunami, the most devastating tsunami in history. Almost 230,000 people were killed when a series of tsunami tidal waves crashed ashore all over this area and the wider Indian Ocean. 14 countries in all suffered loss of life. Here, where we're standing at the moment, this is a village called Ban Nam Kem in a district known as Phang Na. And it's at this point where the country of Thailand was hit the hardest, the most severe. On this beach, the wave that came ashore was an astonishing 20 meters high. That's 65 feet. So where we're standing now, the water was just so high up into the sky. It came ashore with no warning. And in this tiny little village, 1,500 people were killed in an instant, less than 1 kilometre from where I'm standing now, in an area of no more than 1 kilometre from where I'm standing now. The whole village was obliterated. Now, as we approach the 15th anniversary of that incredible event, it's worth remembering some of the incredible statistics from what happened on that day. It all started with an undersea earthquake out there in the middle of the Indian Ocean. Two tectonic plates moved and came together with such force that they pushed them upwards like this. Now, that earthquake lasted for 10 minutes. It's the longest known earthquake to ever be recorded. And it caused a crack in the Earth's crust underneath the ocean bed, which ran for 900 miles. And the force of those two plates coming together and pushing upwards about 30 meters from the floor of the Indian Ocean. Scientists have calculated since that the actual force that was exerted, the shock wave, was equivalent to 1,500 atomic bombs being detonated simultaneously. It's almost beyond imagination. It caused planet Earth to vibrate by about 10 millimeters, or just under half an inch. Planet Earth literally shook with the force of that undersea earthquake. Now, it's since been described as equivalent to dropping the world's largest boulder into a pond. And the ripples that radiate outwards from the point of impact were as high as mountains. Those ripples, of course, became the tsunamis that hit here in Thailand, which also hit Indonesia, which hit Sri Lanka, which hit India. In fact, the first place to be devastated was Indonesia. That was the closest piece of land to where the earthquake occurred. The island of Sumatra in the area of Banda Aceh. The tsunami raced ashore there within something like 20 minutes of the earthquake beginning. And in almost an instant, around 170,000 men, women and children were killed. Thailand was the second country to be hit. Here where we are now, this mountainous tsunami wave that we've spoken about, 20 meters high, came racing across the sea at 500 miles an hour. That's the speed the water was traveling at when it hit this beach. This beach, which now seems so calm, so peaceful, so picturesque, was a scene of utter and epic devastation. Tsunamis continued to travel in all directions. One went across as far as India in the area of Chennai. That went ashore and killed 10,000 people instantly. Just off the Indian coast, the island of Sri Lanka was totally devastated. 30,000 people were killed there. And in all, deaths were recorded in 14 different countries. Incredibly, the effects were felt in many, many places right across the globe. And 5,000 miles away from where we are now, people drowned in the sea off the coast of South Africa. They were swimming in calm waters, and suddenly the effects of the tsunami wave came, and the waters turned so rough that people drowned 5,000 miles away in South Africa. Now, here in Thailand, 2,500 people simply disappeared. They were wiped off the face of the planet. Their bodies have never been found. People think that they were simply washed out to sea as the tsunami receded. In addition to that, almost 5,300 bodies were recovered. So the death toll here was approaching 8,000. Now this is a golden Buddha. Thailand is a Buddhist country, so the vast majority of the Thai people to lose their lives were Buddhists. But all up and down this area there are tsunami memorials and there are shrines to those who lost their lives that day. There's a cemetery very close to here. In all, people from 39 different countries all around the world were amongst those who were killed here in Thailand. Many of them, of course, holidaymakers who'd come here for a Christmas break and, of course, never returned home. Now, we said that 2,500 people in Thailand simply vanished. 5,300 almost were recovered. The bodies were recovered. And over the following 2 years, and it took that long because people who are caught up in a tsunami, it's been described as like putting people in a washing machine. They're just tumbled and twisted and thrown, and sometimes they're unrecognizable even after the event has concluded. So identifying the bodies has been a major problem. But over the 2 years after the tsunami, the vast majority of those 5,300 people were identified, were given back to their families, were given burials or religious services. A huge effort was made, and people from all around the world, experts from all around the world came here to assist in that process. But although they achieved almost complete recognition of those who lost their lives, it wasn't quite total. Still, to this day, 15 years later, there are 340 bodies from that event who remain nameless. Now, just about 3 kilometers from here, there is a Tsunami Cemetery, and it is simply for the graves of the unknown, those 340 people whose bodies have never been given names or nationalities. Side by side, the gravestones are laid in rows. They stretch back into the distance quite some way, and every one of those gravestones doesn't have a name, it simply has a number. So to this day, efforts are continuing to be made to try to identify those bodies. Everyone realizes that for the families there can never really be any peace or closure until they find the answers to their questions. So even after 15 years, this is not something that has been forgotten. And in fact, there is, on this impending 15th anniversary, a new impetus. And there are two new initiatives that are taking place to try to identify those remaining 340 bodies. Now, the first is a re-examination of the evidence that was collected, the personal effects, if you like, that were taken from the bodies that have never been claimed. Everything was meticulously recorded, and items that people were wearing, watches, jewellery, necklaces, telephones, mobile phones in their pockets, items of clothing, shoes, badges, everything that could in some way, police hope, help to lead to the identification of the person, has been kept and has been recorded. Every single piece of evidence is linked to a body which is lying in a numbered grave. And there's a new appeal by the police for any relatives who feel that they may have lost a family member in this momentous event, to perhaps make inquiries and to see whether any of this evidence which is still being kept can help to identify one of the lost ones. Now that's all being kept at a place called Takua Pa. It's a police station very close to where we are now. This is one of the many tsunami memorials, and we're going to be have a look at that in a moment. As you can see, that represents a wave. The curve on that side represents a wave. On this side there is a wall of remembrance. It's by no means comprehensive, but there are a couple of hundred names on here that we can go and look at. So we talked about a fresh approach by the police, a re-advertising, if you like, of the fact that they have a big metal container jam-packed with evidence relating to scores, if not more, of people who were lost in this event. And police very much hope that at some point, even now, even 15 years on, some distinctive piece of clothing or personal belongings could be recognised by someone who could come forward and say, I think that could well be the person that we think was lost. But there's a second initiative as well, a second development that's going on at the same time, but separate from that. And it's thanks to scientific advances. But investigators are now offering DNA tests to the families of foreign workers who may be amongst those lost in that tsunami. This area, like many coastal areas and many beach resorts in Thailand, was home to many foreign workers who worked in restaurants and hotels and on fishing boats, particularly from Myanmar. This was an area where a lot of Myanmar migrants came to find employment. And now, as part of this drive to try to identify these last 340 tsunami victims, but also any other foreign labourers who may well have been killed in other accidents and never had their bodies claimed, they're now trying to identify all of those. You might wonder how that would happen, but you need to bear in mind that in this country, there are many countries that surround Thailand with land borders, and many of their workers come here. And it's been a tradition that the borders in the past have not been too strictly enforced. And many people end up working in places like this without any kind of legal documentation or any identification papers. They're basically under the radar. So when something happens like this and people are killed, it can be very difficult to try to establish just exactly who they were. But that DNA program is being launched, and in fact people who are trying to get that scheme operating are already travelling around Thailand to various areas of the country where there are large populations of foreign workers, and they're appealing directly to those families. If they think there's any possibility that a missing relative could be amongst these tsunami victims, then they want them to come forward. They can take a DNA test and provide a sample. each of the 340 bodies that remain buried in that cemetery, very, very close to here, DNA samples were taken from them before they were buried, so a DNA match could quite quickly, in fact, lead to a formal identification. Now, this whole area, as you can imagine, because it was more or less the epicenter for where the tsunami came ashore in Thailand, there are lots of these different memorials. This particular one was paid for by a German company, and it's so poignant when you walk along it. So each of these plaques names someone who died on that day, December 26, 2004. Many of these people represented here were Europeans who were on holiday. Some of them have, all of them have names, some of them have photographs, some of them even have flowers and tokens. Many of them have inscriptions in many different languages. Here's one in English, "Forever in our thoughts." Many, of course, carrying pictures of those who perished here. This one, "Above the rainbow, we will meet again." It's so incredibly sad when you come to places like this and you stop for a moment and you pause and you remember what happened here. This is such a scene of peace and tranquility. It's an idyllic place to come on holiday. And it was then, but in an instant, it changed forever. This is a fishing village, and obviously a lot of those who lost their lives were fishermen. A lot of fishing boats were lost. Here's one that's been repaired, really, just as an example of the kind of boats that people were using at the time. This was an actual fishing boat that was badly damaged in the tsunami, but it was retrieved and it's been rebuilt so that it resembles its original form. And it's been placed here, really, just as an eye-catching reminder of what this area is all about. Excuse me. In some ways, this memorial and in fact the Tsunami Victims Cemetery a short distance away, they resemble military cemeteries and military memorials. They're kept very clean and tidy. There's a lot of maintenance. The cemetery is really very, very poignant and is definitely worth visiting for anybody who's in this area. And it just starts to bring home to people whose memories may have dimmed, of course, because this event, though momentous, was 15 years ago, and those who weren't directly involved will have moved on in their lives. But of course, for people who lost family members, there is no moving on. So it looks like this person was a firefighter. This represents those who were lost from New Zealand, Norway, the Philippines, Poland, Portugal, France, Finland, Estonia, Denmark, Czechoslovakia. Flowers and a photo. It's so sad. Some of these plaques relate to people from China, some from the United Kingdom, some from Australia, all over. And of course, this is just a tiny, tiny representation of those thousands and thousands of people who died here in Thailand, but also all around the Indian Ocean. Indonesia is a country that has a history of earthquakes and tsunamis. That's a country that, in some ways, perhaps was better prepared, even though it ended up being the most badly affected, simply because it was the closest. But there is no real history of tsunamis here in Thailand, so it was a complete shock. There was no warning. Nobody knew it was coming. Nobody heard the earthquake. Nobody knew there was a tsunami approaching. No official warnings were given at all. No warnings of any kind. And in fact, when the wave first came ashore, it's a symptom of tsunamis that generally a small wave comes ashore and then recedes quite some distance. And people who aren't aware what that foretells are intrigued by that and fascinated. And they flock to the beaches to look because the sea has basically gone away. But then, of course, it comes back, and that's when the big waves generally hit. India and Sri Lanka, again, countries that had no real history of tsunamis and were completely unprepared. Since this happened, a lot has been done in the Indian Ocean now to try to foretell anything like this happening again. Buoys have been placed at sea to register any unusual wave activity. And certainly all along the Thai coast there are warning towers and there are sirens. There are also tsunami escape routes widely signposted now. Tsunami shelters have been built. We're not altogether sure how effective they remain. Clearly this in the years immediately after 2004, an awful lot of international money and effort was put into creating those early warning systems and those escape routes and those shelters. It's sad to say that over time, some of them have not been as well maintained as people would hope. 2 years ago, in 2017, there was an admission by those in charge that up to 80% of the tsunami early warning infrastructure here in Thailand was faulty or needed maintenance or repair. We can only hope that in the last 2 years a lot of that has been done. I think it's impossible to even begin to imagine the power of a tsunami unless in some way you're involved with it. Geologists say that if you have an earthquake, then sadly you have a certain number of people who generally will be killed, but a far larger number who will be injured but will survive. Unfortunately, with a tsunami, it's the opposite that's true. The incredible force and the incredible power of a wave crashing ashore makes it virtually unsurvivable. So in a tsunami, you have a very, very high number of deaths. You have a wall of water coming ashore at 500 miles an hour. That alone is worse than being hit by an express train. But of course it isn't just water, it's picking debris up as it travels. So it'll be carrying trees, it could be carrying cars, it could be carrying parts of buildings. So it is a lethal cocktail. And it is almost unsurvivable. Just a little bit down the road from here, there is a police patrol boat which was caught up in the tsunami and which has been again restored as a memento of that dreadful event. But it was actually discovered 2 kilometers inland. The boat was at sea and the wave simply picked it up and carried it. It carried it across the beach, across houses, across roads, across telegraph poles, and dumped it down in the midst of other debris 2 kilometers inland. Memory's dim, but really nothing like this has ever happened here. Everybody hopes nothing like this will ever happen here again. But nobody has forgotten what took place here. Every year there are major memorials. There will be major memorials this year on December the 26th, which is Thursday of the coming week. Boxing Day around the world, where Christmas is celebrated. That's another thing that perhaps makes it so poignant. This was a holiday event that people who were connected with it will never ever forget. But yes, memorials will take place all up and down this coast for this impending anniversary. And a little earlier today, we went to meet a man who lives in this village and who was living in this village at the time. And when the wave struck, he was actually working, so he was away from his home. But his entire family was simply obliterated. He lost 12 immediate family members who were killed. He searched over the coming days and weeks, and he actually found himself the bodies of 10 of his relatives. Two sisters he has never been able to find. And he kept searching, and he kept searching. And remaining relatives were concerned about the effect that this was having on him. So in the end, they persuaded him to give up the search. So he will never know what happened to his two sisters. But he has spoken favourably, very favourably, about these two new initiatives, the re-examination of the evidence that's stored at a police station very close to here, and the introduction of DNA tests for people who may be connected in some way to someone who's lost. And this man was saying he doesn't think he'll ever find his sisters again. But if only these two initiatives can lead to the identification of even one person, but hopefully more, if that can bring relief to families both here and elsewhere in the world, he says at least that will make him happy. So that's it, really. That's as much as we can bring you today. I think a lot of people around the world will stop and will pause on Thursday, December the 26th, Boxing Day, to remember the events of the Indian Ocean back in 2004, the most devastating tsunami ever in history in terms of the numbers of people killed and the widespread devastation that ensued. In some places in Indonesia, the wave was even higher than it was here. The highest recorded point was said to be 40 meters, 130 feet. It just defies imagination. It must have been absolutely unbearably horrific for those who were caught up in this, even for those who perhaps lost relatives, but for those who lost their lives. Everything changed in that one instant, and it's something that 15 years on will never be forgotten. But the positives that we can take from it is that those 340 unknown victims who lie in graves marked not by names but by numbers, they've not been forgotten. New initiatives are being tried. The police and the Thai authorities are doing everything they can because they understand that no family can ever get any kind of relief until their questions are answered. So that work goes forward. The anniversary marks what happened in the past, but the work goes forward in the hope of bringing some kind of relief to those who lost their loved ones. So from here at Phang Na in southern Thailand, just north of the island of Phuket, and here from this tsunami memorial at the village of Ban Nam Kem, perhaps the community that was most badly affected and lost the highest number of people in such a small area. We're going to wind up. Please spare a thought on Thursday for what happened here, and let's all hope that nothing like this ever happens again. So that's it from me, Martin Lowe, and that's the end of this CGTN broadcast. Thank you very much for joining us. Join us again next time.